I lived for an entire year believing I was dying. I quit my job, ended my engagement, said goodbye to people I loved, and spent every single day preparing for a death that was never coming. The clinic that gave me a terminal diagnosis had mixed up my blood work with someone else's. And for 12 months, while I mourned the loss of a future I thought I'd never have, the person who actually had that disease, the person whose test results were switched with mine, may have been walking around thinking they were perfectly healthy. I don't know if they're still alive. The clinic won't tell me. They say it's a privacy issue, but I know the real reason they won't talk. Because if that person died while I was being treated for their illness, it means the clinic's mistake didn't just steal a year of my life. It means it may have cost someone else theirs. I was 34 years old when I went in for what I thought would be a routine blood test. I had been feeling tired for a few months. Nothing dramatic, just that persistent exhaustion that makes you need an extra coffee in the afternoon and want to be in bed by 9. My doctor suggested we run a full panel: cholesterol, vitamin levels, thyroid function, the usual middle of your 30s checkup to make sure everything was working the way it should. I remember joking with the phlebotomist as she drew my blood, asking if she'd find anything interesting. "You'd be surprised what we find sometimes," she said with a smile. I laughed. I wasn't worried. I was young, relatively healthy, just a little run down from work stress and not sleeping enough. If you love true medical horror stories that expose what can go wrong when hospitals and clinics make mistakes, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone who trusts their doctor with a simple blood test. The call came 4 days later. Not from my regular doctor, but from the clinic's lead physician, Dr. Palmer, asking me to come in as soon as possible. There was something urgent they needed to discuss. The tone of his voice made my stomach drop, that careful, controlled tone that medical professionals use when they're about to deliver bad news and don't want you to panic before you're sitting safely in their office. I asked if he could tell me over the phone. He said he'd rather do it in person. I made an appointment for the next morning, and I didn't sleep at all that night. Dr. Palmer's office was on the second floor of the clinic, a small room with diplomas on the walls and a desk that looked like it had been there since the building opened in the 80s. He gestured for me to sit down, and I noticed he didn't smile. He didn't make small talk or ask how I was feeling. He just opened my file, a physical file, paper in a manila folder, which struck me as oddly old-fashioned, and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. "Your blood work came back with some very concerning results," he said. "Your white blood cell count is extremely elevated, and the differential shows a significant presence of immature cells. Combined with your other markers, this is strongly indicative of acute myeloid leukemia." The words didn't make sense at first. They were just sounds, medical terminology that my brain couldn't process into meaning. Leukemia. Cancer. I stared at him, waiting for him to say something else, something that would make this less terrible. But he just looked back at me with that grave, sympathetic expression. "Are you sure?" I finally managed to ask. "Could it be a mistake?" "The markers are very clear," he said. "I've consulted with an oncology colleague, and based on these numbers, we're looking at an aggressive form. We need to get you to a specialist immediately and start discussing treatment options. Time is critical with this type of cancer." I remember the rest of that conversation in fragments. Words like chemotherapy and bone marrow and prognosis and months instead of years. I remember asking if I was going to die, and Dr. Palmer hesitating just long enough before saying, "With aggressive treatment, there's always hope." Which is not the same as saying no. Which is actually a very gentle way of saying yes. I walked out of that office in a daze. I sat in my car in the parking lot for over an hour, unable to turn on the engine, unable to do anything except stare at the dashboard and try to comprehend that my life had just ended. I was 34 years old. I had plans. I was supposed to get married in 6 months. I was supposed to travel to Japan next year. I was supposed to have decades left, not months. Not weeks. I called my fiancé, Marcus, from the parking lot. I could barely get the words out. When I told him I had cancer, he went silent for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him crying, and that's when it became real. That's when I understood that this wasn't a nightmare I was going to wake up from. This was my new reality, and it was going to destroy everything I had built and everyone I loved. The next week was a blur of appointments. I was referred to an oncologist, Dr. Chen, who looked at the blood work Dr. Palmer had forwarded and confirmed the diagnosis. She explained that acute myeloid leukemia was aggressive but treatable, that we would need to start chemotherapy as soon as possible, that there was a chance, a good chance, she emphasized, that I could achieve remission. But the way she said it, the careful optimism in her voice, told me that she was trying to give me hope without making promises she couldn't keep. I asked her if I should get a second opinion. She said that was always an option, but that the blood work was fairly definitive and that delaying treatment could be dangerous. The cancer was aggressive. Every week we waited was a week it could spread further, become harder to treat. I was terrified of wasting time, terrified that my skepticism or my need for certainty would cost me the few months I might have left. So I didn't get a second opinion. I didn't ask for the tests to be repeated. I trusted the system. I trusted the doctors. And that trust cost me a year of my life. Marcus wanted to stay with me. He insisted that the wedding was still happening, that we would fight this together, that he wasn't going anywhere. But I could see the fear in his eyes every time he looked at me. I could see him calculating how much time we had left, imagining himself as a widower before he'd even been a husband. I loved him too much to put him through that. So 2 weeks after my diagnosis, I ended our engagement. I told him I couldn't watch him watch me die. I told him he deserved a future that didn't involve hospice care and funeral arrangements. He fought me on it. He begged me to reconsider. But I was firm, and eventually he left. I watched him walk out of my apartment with tears streaming down his face, and I told myself I was doing the right thing. I was setting him free. But really, I think I was just trying to control the one thing I still could, who I hurt and how badly. I quit my job a week later. I was a project manager at a tech company, and I knew there was no way I could handle the stress and the hours while going through chemotherapy. I told my boss I had a serious medical condition and needed to step away. He was understanding, sympathetic, promised that my position would be there if I recovered. I knew it wouldn't. I knew I was burning a bridge I'd never be able to rebuild. But what did it matter? I was dying. Career ambitions seemed absurd when measured against the handful of months I had left. The first round of chemotherapy started 3 weeks after my diagnosis. The oncology ward was exactly as terrible as I had imagined. Pale people with hollow eyes, for Poles, the smell of antiseptic trying to mask something sour and sick underneath. I sat in a chair for 6 hours while poison dripped into my veins, and I watched the other patients around me and wondered which ones would make it and which ones would die. I wondered which category I fell into. The side effects were immediate and brutal. Nausea that made me vomit until there was nothing left, exhaustion so profound that I could barely get out of bed, mouth sores that made eating agony. My hair started falling out in clumps after the second treatment. I shaved my head rather than watch it slowly abandon me, and when I looked in the mirror at my bald, gaunt reflection, I saw a stranger. I saw a dying person. And that's who I became. The months that followed were a descent into a life I didn't recognize. Every aspect of my existence became organized around the central fact of my terminal diagnosis. I was no longer a person with hopes and plans and a future. I was a patient, a case number, a body in a chair receiving treatments that made me wish I could die faster just to escape the misery of trying to stay alive. My mother moved in with me after the 3rd round of chemotherapy. I had tried to maintain my independence, tried to convince everyone that I could handle this on my own, but the truth was that I couldn't. I couldn't cook for myself because the smell of food made me nauseous. I couldn't clean my apartment because I was too weak to stand for more than a few minutes. I couldn't manage my own medications because there were so many of them, anti-nausea drugs, pain pills, antibiotics to prevent infections, supplements to boost my depleted immune system, that I kept losing track of what I'd taken and when. My mother quit her part-time job to take care of me. She slept on my couch, woke up every few hours to check if I needed anything, held my head while I vomited into the toilet at 3 in the morning. She never complained. She never showed me how much it was destroying her to watch her daughter waste away. But I could see it in her eyes, in the way her hands shook when she thought I wasn't looking, in the fact that she had started to look almost as sick as I did. My father couldn't handle it. He visited once, stood in my doorway looking at my bald head and my skeletal frame, and burst into tears. He left after 20 minutes, mumbling something about needing to get back to work, and he didn't come back. My mother made excuses for him. He's just processing this in his own way. He loves you so much, he's having a hard time, but I knew the truth. He couldn't bear to watch me die. So he chose not to watch at all. My friends tried at first. They sent cards and flowers, organized meal trains, visited when I felt well enough for company. But as the weeks turned into months, the visits became less frequent. It's hard to maintain friendships with someone who has one foot in the grave. Every conversation became awkward, stilted, filled with the unspoken knowledge that this might be the last time we saw each other. They didn't know what to say to me anymore. They would ask how I was feeling, and I could see them immediately regret the question, because what was I supposed to say? I'm dying. I feel like death. Every day is worse than the last. So I started lying. I told them I was fine, that the treatment was working, that I was optimistic about my chances. And slowly they stopped coming at all. I didn't blame them. Who wants to spend their free time with a walking corpse? I spent my savings on things that seemed important when you think you're running out of time. I took a trip to the coast because I wanted to see the ocean one more time. I booked a weekend at an expensive hotel because I wanted to experience luxury before I died. I bought gifts for the people I loved. Small things, meaningful things, items I imagined them keeping after I was gone and thinking of me when they saw them. I paid for expensive alternative therapies that promised to boost my immune system or detoxify my body or harness the healing power of crystals and meditation and dietary changes. I knew most of it was probably nonsense, but I was desperate. I would have tried anything, paid any amount, if there was even a chance it might buy me a few more weeks. By the 6-month mark, I had burned through almost $40,000. My entire emergency fund, gone. The money I had been saving for a house, for a future, for a life I was never going to have, spent on treatments and trips and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, something would work. The physical symptoms were constant but inconsistent in a way that confused me. Some days I felt almost normal, tired, yes, but functional, capable of walking to the corner store or sitting in the park for an hour. Other days I could barely lift my head from the pillow, my body racked with pain and nausea and a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. I mentioned this to Dr. Chen during one of my check-ins, and she said it was normal for leukemia to fluctuate, that the good days were my body's attempt to fight back and the bad days were the disease asserting itself. It made sense. I believed her. But there were other things that didn't quite add up, details that nagged at the back of my mind even as I tried to focus on survival. During one appointment, I asked Dr. Chen if I could see the original blood work, the results that had led to my diagnosis. I wanted to understand the numbers, to see for myself what had gone so catastrophically wrong in my body. She told me that all my records were in the system and that she had reviewed them thoroughly, but when I pressed for a physical copy, she said she would have to request it from the clinic and it might take a few weeks. The weeks passed. I asked again. She said the clinic was having issues with their record system. I asked a third time, and she changed the subject that I told myself I was being paranoid. The stress of facing my own mortality was making me suspicious of everything, seeing conspiracies where there were only bureaucratic inefficiencies. Of course, the records were hard to access. Medical systems were notoriously complicated, and the clinic was probably understaffed and overwhelmed. There was no reason to doubt the diagnosis. Multiple doctors had confirmed it. The treatment I was receiving was standard for my condition. Everything made sense except for the small voice in the back of my head that kept whispering, "But what if something is wrong?" I started researching acute myeloid leukemia obsessively, reading medical journals and patient forums and survival statistics. I learned that AML typically presented with symptoms like fever, frequent infections, easy bruising, and bone pain. I had the exhaustion and the nausea, but those could easily be from the chemotherapy rather than the disease itself. I hadn't had a fever. I hadn't had any infections despite my supposedly compromised immune system. I bruised easily, but I had always bruised easily, even before the diagnosis. And the bone pain that was supposed to be characteristic of leukemia? I didn't have it. Not once. I mentioned this to Dr. Chen. She told me that leukemia presented differently in different patients, that not everyone had every symptom, that I should consider myself lucky that my case was relatively mild. Relatively mild seemed like an odd way to describe an aggressive cancer that was supposed to be killing me, but I didn't argue. Who was I to question medical professionals who had spent years studying this disease? Around the 8-month mark, something happened that should have been a wake-up call. I developed a severe respiratory infection, pneumonia, the hospital said, which was extremely dangerous for someone with a compromised immune system. I was admitted for a week, hooked up to oxygen and pumped full of antibiotics. The doctors seemed surprised at how quickly I recovered. One of the residents actually said, "Your immune response is remarkably strong for someone in your condition." I asked what he meant by that, and he stammered something about everyone's body being different and hurried out of the room. Looking back, I can see all the signs that should have told me something was wrong. The inconsistencies in my symptoms. The difficulty accessing my original test results. The surprised reactions from medical staff when my body responded well to infections. The fact that despite 9 months of living with supposedly aggressive leukemia, I hadn't actually gotten significantly worse. But when you're told you're dying, when that becomes the lens through which you interpret every experience, you don't question the narrative. You just try to survive it. I celebrated my 35th birthday in my apartment with my mother and 2 friends who had stuck around. There was a cake I couldn't eat because my stomach couldn't handle that much sugar. There were presents I didn't want because what do you give someone who's dying? There were forced smiles and careful conversations that avoided mentioning the future, because everyone in that room believed I didn't have one. My mother took a photo of me blowing out the candles, and when I saw it later, I looked like a skeleton wearing a party hat. I deleted it. I couldn't stand to see what I had become. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. I was going to stop treatment. The chemotherapy was killing me just as surely as the cancer supposedly was, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't spend what little time I had left feeling like death, vomiting and weak and trapped in a body that didn't work. I would rather have 3 good months than 6 months of agony. I would rather die on my own terms. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Chun to tell her my decision. But before that appointment could happen, something changed that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my diagnosis. The unraveling began with a phone call from my insurance company. They wanted to discuss my ongoing treatment plan and explore options for long-term care management. The representative, a woman with a professionally sympathetic voice, asked me about my prognosis and whether my oncologist had discussed hospice care. I told her that I was still receiving treatment, that hospice wasn't on the table yet, though I had been considering stopping chemotherapy. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm looking at your file," she said, "and I'm seeing some inconsistencies in the coding. Your initial diagnosis shows acute myeloid leukemia, but your recent treatment codes suggest a much less aggressive protocol than what we typically see for AML patients. Have you been downgraded to a different diagnosis?" I didn't know what to say. As far as I knew, nothing had changed. I was still being treated for leukemia. "No one has told me about any changes," I said. That's unusual. I'm going to flag this for review. You might want to discuss this with your care team." She hung up, and I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling that familiar unease creeping back. Inconsistencies in the coding. A less aggressive protocol. What did that mean? Was my treatment wrong? Was the insurance company questioning my diagnosis? Or was this just more bureaucratic confusion, the kind of administrative mix-up that happened constantly in the American healthcare system? I called Dr. Chen's office and left a message asking her to call me back. She didn't. I called again the next day. The receptionist said she was with patients and would return my call when she had time. 3 days passed. No call. I started to feel like I was being avoided, which made no sense. Why would my oncologist avoid me? Unless there was something she didn't want to discuss. I decided to go to the clinic where I'd had the original blood work done. If I couldn't get answers from Dr. Chen, maybe I could get them from Dr. Palmer, the physician who had first delivered my diagnosis. I made an appointment, telling the receptionist I had some questions about my ongoing care. She scheduled me for the following week. When I arrived at the clinic, Dr. Palmer seemed surprised to see me. I thought you were being managed by the oncology department at the hospital, he said. I am. But I wanted to talk to you about the original blood work. The results that led to my diagnosis. I've been trying to get a copy of them for months, and no one seems to be able to provide them. Something shifted in his expression. A tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible hesitation. Those results should be in your file, he said. Did you check with Dr. Chin? She said she'd request them from you, but they never came through. I'm asking you directly now. Can I see them? Let me check our system. He turned to his computer and typed for a moment, frowning at the screen. The frown deepened. He clicked a few more times, then sat back in his chair. There seems to be an issue with how that file was archived. I'll need to speak with our records department. An issue, I repeated. What kind of issue? Sometimes older files get corrupted when we transfer them to new systems. It's probably nothing, just a technical glitch. I'll have someone look into it and give you a call. I felt my stomach clench. Dr. Palmer, I've been in chemotherapy for 9 months based on those results. I need to see them. Not eventually, not when it's convenient. Now. He looked uncomfortable. I understand your frustration, but I can't produce records that aren't accessible in the system. Give me a few days to sort this out with IT. Why is this so difficult? It's a blood test. How hard can it be to find one blood test? I promise you I will get to the bottom of this. He stood up, signaling that the appointment was over. In the meantime, continue with your treatment plan as directed by Dr. Chin. I left the clinic feeling more uneasy than ever. A corrupted file. A system error. It was possible. Technology failed all the time. But the way Dr. Palmer had looked when I'd asked for the results, the way he'd rushed me out of his office, told me that this was more than a technical glitch. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, and everyone who should have caught it had either missed it or covered it up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through everything that had happened over the past 9 months. The diagnosis that had come from a routine blood test. The urgency with which they'd pushed me into treatment. The difficulty accessing my original results. The inconsistencies in my symptoms. The insurance company questioning my treatment codes. It all pointed to something that I was terrified to even think, because if I was right, it meant that everything I had been through, the chemotherapy, the pain, the loss of my job and my fiancé and my savings and my hair and my dignity, might have been for nothing. What if I didn't actually have cancer? The thought was so absurd, so impossible, that I almost dismissed it immediately. You don't get misdiagnosed with cancer. Not by multiple doctors. Not for 9 months. Not with ongoing treatment and regular checkups. It would require such a catastrophic failure at every level of the medical system that it seemed beyond the realm of possibility. But then again, I thought about all the stories I'd read. Medical errors were the 3rd leading cause of death in America. Mix-ups happened. Lab results got switched. Patients received the wrong medications, underwent the wrong surgeries, got diagnosed with diseases they didn't have. It was rare, but it wasn't impossible. I spent the next 2 days researching medical malpractice cases involving misdiagnosis. I found dozens of stories. People who had been treated for MS when they actually had Lyme disease, people who had undergone chemotherapy for cancers they didn't have, people who had died from the treatment for misdiagnosed conditions while the real disease went untreated. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. A class action lawsuit against a lab company that had systematically mixed up patient samples, sending thousands of people test results that belonged to other patients. I called Dr. Chen's office again. This time, I didn't ask politely. I demanded to speak with her immediately, and I told the receptionist that if she didn't put me through, I would show up at the hospital and make a scene in the waiting room. The receptionist put me on hold. 5 minutes later, Dr. Chin picked up. I want a new blood test, I said without preamble. A complete panel. Done at a different lab. Today. That's not necessary, Dr. Chin said. Your recent tests have been consistent with your diagnosis and treatment response. What recent tests? I haven't had blood work done in over a month. Another pause. I'm looking at your chart now, and I see that we did a basic CBC at your last infusion. A basic CBC isn't the same as the comprehensive panel that diagnosed me. I want the same tests that were done 9 months ago, performed at an independent lab, with results sent directly to me. Can you order that, or do I need to find another doctor who will? I could hear her frustration. If this is what you need for peace of mind, I can order the tests. But I want to be clear that I believe this is unnecessary and potentially harmful. Doubting your diagnosis at this stage could lead you to stop treatment prematurely, which would be very dangerous if the disease progresses. Order the tests, I said. Please. She scheduled me for blood work the following morning at an independent lab across the city. I went alone, my mother offering to come with me but me refusing because I needed to do this by myself. The phlebotomist was efficient and professional, and she didn't ask why I needed such extensive testing. I watched my blood fill vial after vial, and I prayed for the first time in years, that whatever those vials revealed would finally be the truth. The results would take 3 to 5 business days. I counted down every hour, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything except what those tests might show. 3 days. For days. On the 5th day, I called the lab and was told the results had been sent to Dr. Chen's office that morning. I called Dr. Chen. She didn't answer. I called again. And again. Finally, her receptionist told me that Dr. Chen wanted to meet with me in person to discuss the results. Could I come in tomorrow? I could not wait until tomorrow. I needed to know now. I drove to the hospital. The hospital's oncology wing felt different this time. For 9 months, it had been my second home. A place of suffering, yes, but also a place where I was being cared for, where people were fighting to save my life. Now it felt hostile. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the antiseptic smell too strong, the faces of the staff too carefully neutral. I walked past the infusion room where I had spent countless hours in a chair with poison dripping into my veins, and I felt a surge of rage so powerful it made me dizzy. I found Dr. Chen in her office. She looked up when I burst through the door without knocking, and I saw something in her face that confirmed what I had been afraid of. Guilt. The results came back, I said. It wasn't a question. She gestured for me to sit down. I didn't. I stood in front of her desk with my arms crossed and waited for her to speak. Your blood work came back normal, she said quietly. All markers within expected ranges for someone your age. No indication of leukemia or any other blood disorder. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. Normal. Yes. So I don't have cancer. The current test results do not show evidence of leukemia. She was choosing her words very carefully, I noticed. Using passive voice, distancing herself from the implications. Did I ever have cancer? She didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her desk, at the file that presumably contained my records, and I saw her weighing her options. Tell the truth and admit to a catastrophic failure. Or try to maintain the fiction a little longer, buy herself time to figure out how to spin this. I didn't give her the chance to decide. I want to see the original blood work. The results from 9 months ago that led to my diagnosis. I want them now, printed out in my hands. If you can't produce them, I want you to tell me why. Dr. Chen opened the file. She flipped through several pages, her expression growing more troubled with each one. Finally, she looked up at me. The original diagnostic labs aren't in your file. According to these notes, they should have been uploaded from the clinic system, but I'm only seeing a summary report, not the actual lab values. Why would you treat someone for 9 months without verifying the original test results? The summary was sufficient. It showed clear markers for AML and... Show me the summary. She turned the file around so I could see. There, on a single page, was a typed note dated 9 months ago. Patient blood work shows WBC 89,000, blast cells 65%, consistent with acute myeloid leukemia. Recommend immediate referral to oncology. No lab letterhead. No detailed breakdown of values. No signature from the lab that had supposedly performed the test. Just a typed summary that could have been written by anyone. This isn't a lab report, I said. This is someone's note about a lab report. Where's the actual report? It should have been attached. Dr. Chen was flipping through the file again, and I could see panic starting to creep into her expression. There should be documentation from the lab with their official letterhead and certification. This is just a referral note. You've been treating me based on a referral note? For 9 months? Without ever seeing the actual lab results. I assumed the results were in the file. I should have verified, She stopped herself. I need to contact the clinic immediately. She picked up her phone and dialed. I listened as she asked to speak with Dr. Palmer, was told he wasn't available, insisted that it was urgent. She was put on hold. We sat there in silence, listening to the bland hold music, and I thought about everything I had lost. My job, my fiancé, my savings, my hair. A year of my life spent preparing to die. And for what? A referral note? A summary that no one had bothered to verify? Dr. Palmer finally picked up. Dr. Chen put the phone on speaker. We have a problem, she said. I need you to pull the original lab results for a patient of mine. The ones that diagnosed her with AML 9 months ago. Who's the patient? She gave him my name. I heard typing on the other end of the line, then a long silence. Dr. Palmer? I'm looking now. 1 moment. More typing. More silence. Then, there's a note here that the samples from that date were part of a batch that had processing issues. They were flagged for potential mix-up. The room went very quiet. Dr. Chen's face had gone white. Mix-up, she repeated. Yes. Apparently there was an issue with the barcode scanner that day. Multiple samples were processed, but some of the labels may have been associated with the wrong vials. A corrective action report was filed. Let me pull that up. Another pause. Here it is. Dated a week after the tests were run. It says that all patients from that batch were supposed to be contacted for redraw and verification. Was your patient contacted? No, Dr. Chen said. She was referred directly to me based on the initial results. Then someone dropped the ball. She should have been retested before any treatment began. Dr. Chen's hands were shaking. Are you telling me that you've known for 9 months that her test results might have been incorrect and no one contacted her? I'm telling you that there was a process failure somewhere in the chain. The corrective action report lists the patients who needed to be contacted. Let me check if she's on the list. More typing. A soft curse on the other end of the line. Yes. She's here. Someone was supposed to reach out to her on. He paused and I could hear him checking the date. 9 months ago. The same week she was diagnosed. I felt something break inside me. Not a clean break, like glass shattering. A slow, grinding collapse, like a building folding in on itself. Whose results did she get? I asked. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. If my blood work was mixed up, whose tests came back with the leukemia? No one answered. Dr. Palmer had gone silent. Dr. Chen was staring at the phone like it had just bitten her. Someone actually has that disease, I said. Someone got my clean results and thought they were fine. And I got theirs and have been destroying my body with chemotherapy for 9 months. Where are they? What happened to them? I can't disclose information about other patients, Dr. Palmer said. I don't care about privacy laws. Someone has been walking around with untreated leukemia while I've been getting poisoned for a disease I never had. Are they alive? Did they die because you couldn't be bothered to follow up on your corrective action report? I'm going to need to consult with our legal team before I can answer any more questions. He hung up. I looked at Dr. Chen. She looked at me. Neither of us knew what to say. You've been poisoning me, I finally said. For 9 months. With chemotherapy I never needed. For a disease I never had. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear to you I didn't know. You should have known. You should have verified. You should have done your job. I turned and walked out of her office. I walked down the hallway, past the nurse's station where people had watched me waste away for 9 months, past the infusion room where I had suffered, past the elevator and the waiting room and the main entrance. I walked out into the parking lot and I stood there in the afternoon sun, feeling it warm on my bald head, and I realized that I had no idea who I was anymore. I wasn't the person I had been before the diagnosis. That person was dead, erased by 9 months of thinking I was dying. But I also wasn't actually dying, which meant I had to figure out how to live again. And I had no idea how to do that. I sat down on the curb and I cried. Not tears of relief or joy or even anger. Just tears. Because sometimes that's all you can do when your entire reality has been revealed as a lie. The aftermath was worse than the illness ever was. At least when I thought I was dying, I had a script to follow. Society knows how to handle terminal illness. There are stages of grief, support groups, protocols for how to be with someone who's running out of time. But there's no script for what to do when you find out you've spent a year preparing for a death that was never coming. No support group for people who were poisoned by the medical system. No protocol for rebuilding a life you thought was over. The clinic offered me a settlement. Not an apology, they were very careful never to admit fault, but a financial settlement in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. Their lawyer called it compensation for the unfortunate administrative error that resulted in treatment delays. Treatment delays. As if the problem was that I hadn't gotten care quickly enough, rather than that I'd been given care I never needed. I refused to sign. I wanted them to acknowledge what they'd done, to admit that their mistake had destroyed my life. They wouldn't. So I hired my own lawyer and filed a malpractice suit. The legal process was exhausting and re-traumatizing in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had to sit in depositions and describe every detail of my suffering while lawyers for the clinic tried to minimize it, to suggest that I hadn't really been harmed because I was ultimately fine. They argued that the chemotherapy I'd received was low dose and unlikely to cause lasting damage. They pointed out that I was alive and therefore had experienced a positive outcome. They made it sound like I should be grateful. I found out about the other patient during discovery, the one whose test results I had received. His name was Thomas Brennan, and he had been 58 years old when he went to the clinic for blood work. He got my clean results. He was told he was healthy, and 6 months later, he collapsed at work and was rushed to the emergency room, where they discovered he had advanced leukemia that had progressed far beyond the point where treatment could save him. He died 3 weeks after that. He left behind a wife and 2 adult children who had no idea that their husband and father's death could have been prevented if someone at the clinic had bothered to follow up on a corrective action report. I met his wife once. My lawyer arranged it, thinking that we might be able to join our cases together. She looked at me with such hatred that I flinched. "You took his treatment," she said. "You got the chemotherapy that should have been his. And he died because no one told him he was sick." "I didn't know," I said. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did he. We didn't join our cases." She settled separately, quickly, quietly, because she didn't have the energy to fight the way I did. I understand. Grief is exhausting enough without adding a legal battle on top of it. My case took 2 years to resolve. In the end, the clinic settled without admitting wrongdoing. The amount was enough to cover my medical expenses and my lost wages and then some, but no amount of money could give me back the year I lost or erase the trauma of what I'd been through. The settlement included a provision that allowed me to tell my story publicly, which is why I'm here now, telling you this. The physical effects of the chemotherapy were real, even though the disease wasn't. I have permanent nerve damage in my hands and feet. My immune system never fully recovered. I developed early menopause from the toxicity of the drugs. I'll never be able to have biological children, which wasn't something I'd been planning in the immediate future, but the choice was taken from me. My body paid the price for a mistake that wasn't mine. But the psychological damage is worse. I have PTSD. I have nightmares about hospitals. I can't go to doctor's appointments without having panic attacks. The smell of antiseptic makes me nauseous. I don't trust medical professionals anymore, which means that if I ever do get seriously ill, I'll probably wait too long to seek treatment because I'm terrified of being misdiagnosed again. The irony isn't lost on me. I tried to reconnect with Marcus, the fiancé I had pushed away. He was seeing someone else by then. He was kind about it, but distant, and I could see that the person I had been, the person he had fallen in love with, didn't exist anymore. I wasn't angry. How could I expect him to love someone who had broken his heart to spare him from grief that never needed to happen? We said goodbye, and this time it was final. I tried to go back to work, but I couldn't focus. I would sit at my desk and think about all the time I'd wasted, all the opportunities I'd missed, All the things I'd given up because I thought I didn't have a future. My coworkers didn't know what to say to me. The ones who knew about my diagnosis would congratulate me on my recovery, as if this were a happy ending, as if I hadn't lost everything along the way. I quit after 3 months and took a job at a nonprofit that advocates for patient rights. It doesn't pay well, but at least I feel like I'm doing something meaningful with the wreckage of my life. My mother still apologizes sometimes. She thinks she should have questioned the diagnosis, should have pushed for a second opinion, should have protected me better. I tell her it's not her fault, that she trusted the doctors just like I did, that no one could have known. But I can see in her eyes that she doesn't believe me. She thinks she failed me. And maybe she did, but so did everyone else. The entire system failed me. And the worst part is that it's still failing other people, right now in hospitals and clinics all over the country. Subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications for more true medical stories that expose what happens when the healthcare system fails. And if you believe that patients deserve better, that we all deserve doctors who verify, who double-check, who treat us like human beings instead of case numbers, drop a heart in the comments. Because the only way we change this broken system is by refusing to stay silent about what it does to us. I'm 37 years old now. I've been healthy for 2 years, though I'll never feel truly healthy again. I live alone in a small apartment. I go to therapy twice a week. I take antidepressants and sleeping pills and medication for the nerve pain that will probably never go away. I'm alive, which is supposed to be enough. Which is supposed to be a miracle. But I'm haunted by the ghost of the person I was before the diagnosis. The person who had plans and dreams and a future. The person who trusted doctors and believed that the system would protect her. That person died in Dr. Palmer's office 9 months into a year that stole everything from her. And the person I am now, the one who survived, is someone I'm still learning how to be. I think about Thomas Brennan sometimes. The man who got my test results and died because of it. I wonder if he suffered. I wonder if his wife held his hand at the end. I wonder if he knew that his death was preventable, or if they kept that from him. I hope they kept it from him. I hope he died believing it was just bad luck, just the cruelty of random chance, rather than knowing that someone's mistake had killed him. Because that's the real horror of this story. Not the misdiagnosis. Not even the wasted year. It's the knowledge that the system we trust to save our lives is held together by people who make mistakes, who cut corners, who fail to follow up on corrective action reports, who treat patients like paperwork instead of human beings. And when those mistakes happen, when people like me and Thomas Brennan fall through the cracks, the system protects itself first and its patients second. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that it can happen to you. A simple blood test. A routine checkup. One mistake, one mislabeled vial, one administrative error, and your entire life can be destroyed. Don't trust blindly. Ask questions. Demand second opinions. Verify your test results. Be annoying if you have to be. Because the only person who will really advocate for your health is you. And if you're going through something similar right now, if you've been misdiagnosed, mistreated, or dismissed by the medical system, know that you're not alone. Know that your trauma is real even if the disease wasn't. Know that you have the right to be angry, to grieve, to demand accountability. And know that healing is possible even when it feels impossible. It's slow and painful and incomplete, but it's possible. I'm still here. I survived a year of dying that never needed to happen. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure that other people don't have to go through what I did. That's all I can do. That's the only meaning I can make from this nightmare. And some days it's almost enough.